Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us on the program. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. Today on the show, EU supports Egypt with 89 million euros to fight COVID-19. And Kenya to gradually remove taxes on UK goods. Plus, we look at what no deal Brexit could mean for African economies. We get the show started with the markets, and the major markets we track here in Africa were all in positive territory at intraday. Nigeria's main index reversed the downward trend and was up 0.11% at midday, while the JSE index gained 0.28%. Elsewhere, Egypt's EGX 30 advanced 0.36%. Kenya closed positive on Friday. It was a similar picture in the Middle East, where major markets were all in the green. In the UAE, Dubai's index gained the most by 0.34%, while the Abu Dhabi index advanced 0.26%. The Qatari index rose 0.16%, while Saudi Arabia's market was marginally higher by 0.01%. And European stocks traded higher in early trade as market focus remains on negotiations between the UK and EU on a post-Brexit trade deal. That's not all. Germany is introducing another lockdown this week. Let's bring in Chelsea for details. Hello, Chelsea. Good afternoon. A beautiful week. Good to see you. Well, German leaders agreed on Sunday to introduce a hard lockdown over the holiday period amid a record surge in coronavirus cases. What are the new restrictions?
Well, the new restrictions will close retail stores in Germany, except for essential stores like grocery stores and home work stores. But it also will close schools starting on Wednesday. Either schools must close or they must move to remote learning. This is quite a controversial step by Germany, which has really tried to preserve the opening of schools. But given the wave of infections we're seeing, politicians were pretty much united behind the idea that we do need stricter rules in Germany. Germany has been in a so-called lockdown light since the beginning of November, which shut down bars and restaurants, but allowed other stores to remain open as well as schools. That has not stemmed the tide of new infections. We're now seeing daily case numbers that are about 3 times the records of earlier this year. So it is a significant strain on healthcare system, on hospitals. And so we are seeing this really unhoped for move of a hard lockdown that will stretch over the holiday period into January. The hard lockdown is expected to last until January 10th. But we've already heard politicians cautioning that these measures could be extended even further into January. So this is the beginning of a very difficult and strenuous period for Germany and for the German economy.
All right, Germany's economy had been recovering in recent months from the spring lockdown and was expected to end this year on solid footing. What will these new measures for Europe's largest economy?
This will pose a major threat to the German economy. As you mentioned, the economy had been recovering after the lockdown measures of early spring were lifted over the summer. And we'd seen a pretty broad recovery in many industries. The lockdown that began in November did dent some of that momentum in the service sector, but these new rules will put a lot more pressure on the German economy, in particular retailers who had really been hoping for a big Christmas holiday shopping season now will have to shut their doors just a few days before Christmas. That will put a lot of pressure on them. Many The Retail Industry Association has warned that hundreds of thousands of jobs could be lost. Retailers are expected to lose about €1 billion a day because of these new measures. So this really puts the retail sector in a very bad spot. So far, the economy minister here, Peter Altmaier, has said that he doesn't expect Germany to slip back into a recession. That will depend in large part on how the industrial side of the economy, which has been really the major bright spot for Germany this year, if that can continue to support the overall economy, because we will see the retail side, the bars and restaurants, all of these service side activities will remain under extreme pressure.
And Brexit talks have been extended again after the UK and EU failed to seal an agreement by their Sunday deadline. How are markets in Europe reacting?
This has given a bit of a boost to markets here in Europe. Here in Frankfurt, the DAX is up over 1%. We also see the FTSE up in London as well. We've seen a particularly big rally in the British pound, which is up more than 1% against other currencies. This is a positive sign for Brexit negotiations, which have been really difficult and not making a lot of progress recently. They had set Sunday as the deadline for reaching a deal, but they've decided to extend that further. There are still a lot of really difficult issues that we aren't seeing a ton of progress on, particularly the rights of European fishermen to fish in UK waters, as well as the provisions over a level playing field. That's been really the big issue in these negotiations. Is the UK wants its ability to be free from European regulations. Europe says if they want to have a trade deal, they need to abide by European regulations and standards. These are very difficult issues that have really been problematic and we haven't seen either side budge much over the past 4.5 years. So there is hope that they will be able to reach a deal, but we've also heard a lot of warnings from both sides that a deal is still very difficult and there isn't a huge likelihood. So investors are really trying to parse what the odds really are given these mixed messages from the UK and the EU.
Let's just hope they eventually reach a deal. Chelsea, thank you very much, and let's continue to track those developments there. Enjoy the rest of the day. And the news that trade negotiations with the European Union are continuing post the pound higher against the US dollar and the euro in the morning. Juliana joins me now for update from London. Hello, Juliana. Good afternoon. Well, the pound is on the front foot this morning after the UK and the EU indicated that trade negotiation is continuing. Now, some analysts say this once again showed that last-minute deadlines mean nothing. Bring us up to speed with reactions from the markets.
Yes, as you know, just to reiterate what Chelsea was saying there in Frankfurt, the fact that the pound and the FTSE is soaring, the investors are pretty happy about this extension of deadline. I've got to quickly bring you some breaking news, though, Chimaze, because obviously this is going to affect many of our viewers in London. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has just been speaking to media here. We are actually expecting London to go into Tier 3 lockdown. Possibly by midnight. We are expecting a statement from the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Tier 3 would obviously mean that there is a massive restriction on movement and the hospitality sector will have to close. That is breaking news. It is coming. We were expecting there to be a shift on Wednesday or Thursday, but because there's been a surge by 75%, that is expected to be urgently pushed forward. That will also affect people who think they want to come into London over the next few days. Thought I'd bring you that because that is very important and will, of course, affect the capital city in the run-up to Christmas. But yes, of course, Brexit is a mass discussion. There is lots of optimism. There's been deadline after deadline. They've been pushed and extended. After Wednesday's late night 3-hour dinner talk over fish, it was a little bit tense. But yesterday, Ursula von der Leyen and Boris Johnson released a joint statement. A joint statement is very, very important, means that there is at least some sort of cohesion amongst them. And they said they're not going to put an extended deadline. They're going to talk and talk and talk until they can try and strike a deal. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Britain, in a lot of trouble. There are some suggestions that if he does not get a deal, then his position as Prime Minister is untenable. And if you think about where we were this time last year when I was speaking to you, Chimaze, he had just won that 80-seat majority, the most successful prime ministerial win since Margaret Thatcher. A year later, some people are saying if he doesn't get a deal, it could be out. There are some sources also suggesting that perhaps there will not be a deal on the 31st of December. There will be a gentlemanly, womanly handshake and talks will continue. So it's all up in the air, all to play for. But there is optimism, as we can see from the rally. The FTSE All-Share is up by 0.54%. The FTSE 100 up by 0.39%. And the FTSE 250 up by 1.44%. 1%. In the currencies market, the pound up on the US dollar by 1.43%, up on the euro by 1.16%, and up on the Japanese yen by 1.12% at intraday.
Well, that news on another lockdown, possibly later today, I'm sure it's not going down well with a lot of people. But then the UK is dealing with Brexit. The clock is still ticking towards 31st December when the withdrawal agreement expires, meaning businesses still don't have the clarity they desperately need. Without a deal, what will these mean, not just for the markets, but for businesses?
Well, it's going to be increasingly difficult. You know, we're going into the 5th year of these Brexit talks. The government's own Office for Budget Responsibility, I believe last week, said a no-deal exit, a crash out of the European Union into these World Trade Organization standards. So an Australia deal is likely to wipe about 2% off Britain's GDP. That's the equivalent of about $45 billion, bearing in mind as well that Britain is the worst affected G8, G7 Western country from COVID-19. We're already expected to contract by 10% this year. The Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey says it is in the best interest for Britain to get some sort of a deal. Unemployment at the moment internationally may not be that bad, but we're certainly seeing it rise to about 5%. Hundreds of thousands of people, almost 1 million people have lost their jobs because of COVID. You add Brexit to that, and that's a huge issue. A lot of people with British passports are pretty comfortable with just going to St Pancras, jumping on a Eurostar, getting to France. That cannot happen anymore. Britain has to strike individual deals if they cannot get a deal with the EU, with 27 other nations. There have been lots of concerns from business leaders last week talking about doing business in Paris, doing business in Frankfurt. How are they going to be able to do that? And the issue that we have, Chimeze, is that we just don't know what we're going to be doing when it comes to importing and exporting, under what conditions. So there are so many issues. This morning I was speaking to Bissy as well from some information about the British Retail Consortium. According to them in the Sunday Times, the British government have been advising supermarkets to stockpile, to make sure they have enough food. We already saw massive stockpiling from consumers during the first lockdown. Britain do not want to see a copy of that. They don't want to see a repeat of that in the next couple of weeks. So they are asking people to shop as normal. But then also there's an issue about medicine. There are so many issues to contend with, not least Dover, and the hours upon hours of queues that we're expecting. And, you know, Boris Johnson was pretty clear when he gave his televised address to the nation last week, whether there is a deal or not, there will be significant changes on the 1st of January. And that's not just going to be that we managed to finally escape 2020. Britain is going to be now a nation on its own. And there are lots of concerns that the majority of businesses up and down this country are just not ready.
Well, let's just hope they reach a deal eventually. Anyway, BP, Glencore and Rolls-Royce are among 8 FTSE 100 companies who have refused to comply with investor demands to disclose their carbon dioxide emissions. How is this impacting their shares?
No impact on the shares from what I've seen. And according to their spokespeople, they haven't refused. And I suppose they haven't really, because they still got a lot of time. Last week or last month, Chancellor Rishi Sunak enshrined in law that by 2025, all British companies must announce and put out their fight to beat carbon emissions and how they are going to plan to do that. If you are a blue chip companies, if you are listed on the FTSE 100 or even the FTSE 250, you have until 2022. This has been in the pipeline for quite a while now. It even started from the former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney, who's really been pushing for clean, green energy. And it does have the backing from investors. I believe there are about 100 investors, 500 investors that have assets worth $106 trillion. Now, they are saying that they want every company that they invest in to be carbon neutral by 2025. So there's a big issue and a big push. I believe 96 of the blue chip companies have so far, 92 have so far put forward their carbon emission footprints. But there are 8, as you said, Just Eat is one of them, and 7 others that haven't done so. But it's not illegal. They still have time. Many of them have also been dealing with mergers and acquisitions. They're not sure exactly how it's playing out. But this is really just part of Britain putting their foot first. They want to be seen as the world leader when it comes to this clean, green energy, the clean, green economy. And it just comes at a time when obviously next year we've got that COP26 gathering in Scotland. So at the moment, not illegal, hasn't affected shares, but it's certainly something that's on the top of the agenda for the British Treasury and investors.
Well, Juliana, let's continue to keep a track on those developments. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day. And what would no deal Brexit mean for the African economies? Matt Kindiger of Frontier View is next. The UK and EU have agreed to begin a new push to reach agreement on post-Brexit trade after both sides agreed to go the extra mile. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson had warned a no deal is the most likely outcome. Now, the ultimate deadline is 31st of December, and time must be allowed for the UK and European parliaments to vote on any deal that emerges before then. Analysts say the no-deal Brexit outcome will not only disrupt UK-EU trade, but also the UK's trading relations with its African partners, many of which are currently conducted under existing EU arrangements such as the Economic Partnership Agreements. Let's talk to Matt Kindiger, Associate Practice Lead, Sub-Saharan Africa with Frontier View. Hello, Matt. Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me on the program today.
And thank you for joining us again. And how disruptive do you think a no-deal Brexit would be for African economies over the coming months?
Yeah, so this is the really important question. I think everybody wants to know, how will a no-deal Brexit affect Britain's main trading partners? So it's worth remembering that most of the trade agreements between between the UK and its big trading partners in Africa, so especially Kenya and South Africa, they have been replicated through continuation agreements. So from a trade barriers perspective, we wouldn't expect a no-deal Brexit to result in a significant introduction of new trade barriers. However, there would be weaker import demand from the UK, especially in the first quarter of 2021. And this is as the economy really reels from the shock of a no-deal Brexit. And there's also likely to be a weaker pound, which would result in weaker import demand. And there's also most likely to be a greater congestion at the UK's ports, which would mean that getting products into the UK would be more difficult for African exporters. So there probably would be quite significant logistical difficulties for companies exporting from Africa to the UK in early 2021. So the fallout would be quite acute, but also probably quite short term.
Now, once the short-term effects of a no-deal Brexit recede, how will the UK's trade policy and economic performance in the early 2020s affect different countries and industries in Africa?
Yeah, so I mean, those are the two sort of crucial questions to be asking. So once the immediate effects of Brexit recede, what will things look like in terms of trading relationships between the UK and the rest of Africa? So in terms of policy, the UK government for sure will want to support trade between the UK and Africa, especially Commonwealth countries in the Anglosphere. So it'll probably do this by expanding things like UK export finance and potentially look to reduce trade barriers. But I really don't see the UK reducing trade barriers significantly. So African countries and companies should not expect a reduction in trade barriers or easier market access. And also increasingly over time, the EU will become a more important trade partner than the UK for Africa. So we do expect African countries to pivot more towards the EU in terms of following their standards, for example. In terms of the economic outlook, so most of the UK economy will suffer as a result of Brexit, even if there is a deal. And this does mean that we would expect to see lower foreign direct investment from the UK into Africa. And there's also going to be downward pressure on tourism, for example, from the UK to Africa over the next few years.
Now, the UK government has controversially decided to cut its overseas aid budget in 2021. How will this affect UK's post-Brexit relations with Africa over the coming years?
Yeah, so this is really illustrative of the foreign policy challenges that the UK faces, especially with regards to Africa. So the UK government wants to pursue a so-called global Britain approach to trading and engaging with African countries. But the reality is that the UK government really lacks the physical capacity to push forward this global Britain agenda. And this generally means that there will be less physical support for African governments, less UK support for infrastructure investment and social programs, for example. And this means effectively that the UK will play a diminished role over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of aid, investment, and involvement in the development and growth of African economies. So we really do expect the UK to narrow its focus. It's probably going to be really more interested in developing stronger relations with Commonwealth countries, Anglophone countries struggle to compete with the European Union in terms of its influence in Francophone markets, for example, in West Africa.
Well, Matt, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much.
And the European Union is supporting Egypt with a financial package of 89 million euros to combat the coronavirus. The amount includes support for the national plan and strategy of the Ministry of Health and Population to combat the virus and limit its effects in Egypt by strengthening the capacity of the health system response, taking preventive measures and detecting cases to prevent the transmission of the virus, and establishing an institutional structure to coordinate and follow up the national health response strategy and plan. Egyptian Minister of International Cooperation says the money will be disbursed in 2 tranches, one with a value of 80 million euros and the second with a value of 9 million euros. And consumer confidence in South Africa remains subdued in the 4th quarter, even after a partial recovery as the easing of restrictions aimed at curbing the spread of the coronavirus pandemic allowed more people to get back to work. A quarterly index measuring sentiment rose to -12 from -23 in the 3 months through September. Despite the improvement, festive season sentiment is at the weakest since 2015 and is below the average consumer confidence reading of 2 since 1994. The level of recovery in sentiment across income groups diverges, with higher income categories lagging, suggesting a slow recovery in consumer spending. And that's a wrap of the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimizi Ubiwago.
Measures are crucial in the fight against COVID-19.